Hi everyone! So with more and more people getting into rare houseplants these days, and people who are already into rare houseplants getting even deeper into rare houseplants, I thought today would be a good day to take a look at some of the plants in my collection that I feel like are highly underrated. Now, the reason most of these are underrated probably has to do with the fact that they are more common in nature, but bonus side to that is they are more affordable. But these are some of my tried and true plants, and I will explain why that is as we go along today. But let's just jump right into it. And I actually want to start with Hoya in general. However, specifically, I'm talking about the more common Hoyas because if you don't know, Hoya heads is a term for a reason. People who are really into Hoyas tend to get super into the rarer types of Hoya. And I feel like a lot of people just kind of brush the more common ones aside and they end up being a little bit underrated. But in general, you guys, I feel like Hoya are underrated because a lot of people out there really don't like Hoya for some reason, and I don't know why. So let me explain to you why I think they are fabulous, and I do think that there is a Hoya for everybody. I've said this before in my Hoya care guide video, and by the way, you guys, I do have care guide videos for most of the plants that I'll be showing you today, so I'll be sure to link those in the description down below for you for easy access should you need them. But I brought out my Hoya Wayettii today because it is one of the more common Hoyas that you can find in almost any plant store. My hair is getting hooked on it. Any plant store that you go to. Some other common Hoyas that I'm talking about when I say common Hoyas, Hoya curtisii is another one. I absolutely love my Hoya curtisii. Your standard Hoya carnosas that you can find in your stores, such as the Crimson Princess, the Crimson Queen, just the regular plain old green Hoya carnosa. These plants, you guys, are so laid back. It's part of the reason I feel like they're underrated. They are honestly quite easy to care for as long as you're not an overwaterer. They do not like to be overwatered, but they can go like decades sometimes living in the same pot. They don't need to frequently be repotted. You can let them dry all the way out in between waterings. I actually recommend you do let them dry all the way out in between waterings. They grow kind of slow to start, which I know annoys some people, but then they will eventually start to take off. And they get beautiful flowers, such as this one you're seeing on my Hoya Crimson Princess, which is the most recent one to bloom for me. But part of the reason I wanted to bring this Wayettii out today is because I did notice it is getting its first bloom. So hopefully the camera will focus enough for you guys to see that. That is a start of a bloom at the end of the peduncle there. And this is the first time this plant will have bloomed for me. So I'm kind of excited to see what color the flowers are going to be. So far, I have white flowers on my Hoya Croniana Super Silver, pink flowers on my Hoya Carnosa Compacta Wilbur Graves, the Hoya, my variegated Hoya Carnosa, I said that wrong. Let's back that last plant up. Pink flowers on my Hoya Carnosa Wilbur Graves. Also have pink flowers on my variegated Hoya Carnosa Compacta, and the flowers that just came in on my Crimson Princess, they're kind of a lighter shade of pink compared to the other two that I just mentioned. So super excited to see what this one's going to look like. This officially means that the only Hoyas I have that have not bloomed for me ever yet are my Hoya curtisii and my Hoya linearis, and you better believe I've been checking every single day, including I was checking this one every single day too, once my other Hoyas started to bloom, to see if they were going to start to bloom. So I'm really hoping those other two are going to bloom for me soon. But like I said, just super laid back, all kinds of different shapes and varieties of Hoya. I like this one in particular because it's got that more narrow shape, and the leaves are kind of like, taco shaped might be the best way to describe it. They fold in on themselves, and then this plant is living directly in a southern facing window, so it has been getting a little bit of sun stressing on some of these leaves. That's why you see pink. But then also when new leaves come in, like right here, as the new leaves come in, they always come in a little bit more pink before fading into the kind of pale yellow green that you see on this plant. Now, another nice thing about Hoya is they can tolerate higher levels of light. I want to remind everybody, especially for those of you who might be new, that my southern facing windows on the downstairs back portion of my house, which is where a lot of my plants such as this one live, I have had those upgraded from the builder grade windows. They have windows that block more of the heat, block more of the harmful direct rays of the sun when they hit that window. So I have found that a lot of my plants that might not have been able to live happily in the builder grade windows can now live happily in those windows. But Hoyas are one of those where I feel like even if I still had the builder grade windows, they would probably be okay with it because they do tolerate high levels of light pretty well. And in fact, they really like it. You don't really want to put a Hoya in a low light situation, but medium to high light definitely will work for these plants. You guys, they're just so easy to care for. So laid back. They keep growing all the time. You can let them trail. You can put them on a trellis, a pole. There's just so many options for how to display Hoyas and thousands of different varieties of Hoya to choose from. They seriously are so underrated. And if you're one of those people who really just doesn't like Hoya, I would really like to know why. And honestly, I have to be honest here. I was one of those people at first that was like, I don't get it. I don't get it. I don't like Hoyas. But I realized it was the Hoyas that I was first seeing in stores, that I was first introduced to, are larger leafed Hoyas. And I prefer the smaller leafed Hoyas, such as this, the Hoya curtisii. The Hoya linearis is one of my absolute favorites. So that's kind of like, I get where you're coming from. But like I said, I think there's a Hoya for everybody. So if you're convinced that there's not a Hoya for you, I'm just curious what it is about Hoyas that makes you think they're not for you. Unless it's just like the care requirements, like maybe you're an overwaterer and you just can't get the watering right or something like that. But I'm just curious. Comment down below and let me know. All right, so up next, I'm gonna grab this large plant off the floor here because I just feel like, I mean, this plant is so underrated. All the plants in this genus are underrated. And I actually had mentioned in my purge video last year that I might be getting rid of this plant. And yeah, I don't know what the heck I was talking about. She's still with me and she's gonna stay with me. I think it was because I had been having some issues, but then she turned around because I got my act together and put her in a better location in my house. But let me pick her up real quick. It is my Aglaonema Maria. Okay, here she is, and this cover pot is ridiculously heavy, so let me just get her out of that. She is looking fabulous, you guys. I don't even remember. I guess maybe the last time you saw her might have been in the houseplant tour video at the beginning of the year, but love the lance-shaped leaves on the Aglaonema Maria with the kind of grayish variegation on there. And you can see that one leaf tip, where'd it go? Right there. Yeah, that would be Scooter bit that leaf tip off when I first brought him home back in January. So it just kind of looks like that, but he hasn't really messed with it since then. So it's just that one leaf, and I could remove it, but I chose not to. But she is definitely started to fill out more and more and more. Now, she did originally live here in my office in front of the window that this big guy is in front of, and I just found that she really didn't like that. This is a north-facing window, and this time of year, it is slightly obstructed. I don't know how to explain this. There's two windows here side by side that are identical. The one right by the Thematophyllum here is not totally obstructed, but the one next to it, there is a Chinese magnolia that is outside that window. It's relatively short too, so the foliage on the top half of that kind of obscures the light. So I feel like this plant, I have to be careful about what plants I put in these windows because this time of year is when these windows get the most light because the sun is tracking more north in the sky. So usually this time of year is when my plants living in front of these windows are the happiest. But you gotta remember, like a Chinese magnolia is deciduous, so in the winter it has no leaves on it. So potentially the plants in front of these windows might be getting a little bit more light in the winter just because there's no foliage on that Chinese magnolia. But I had discovered that Maria was getting a little bit etiolated, so if you don't know what that means, leggy. The growth between the nodes was getting longer and longer. She was starting to lose a bunch of her lower leaves. This is one of the oldest stem stalks, plantlets, whatever you want to call it, in this pot here. And you can see how a lot of the leaves are missing there and it is just kind of stretched out. Now looks like she's getting ready to kill off that leaf, which is not surprising, you guys, because I don't know if you noticed, but she's flowering like mad. You guys see all these flowers up in here? Tons of flowers. I probably need to go in and remove them so she doesn't keep sacrificing foliage, but one leaf, not that big of a deal. But since I moved her into my bedroom where she lives in a corner, you guys. It's kind of funny. I have to laugh because sometimes I feel like she's getting less light where she lives in my bedroom. I'll cut in a clip so you can better understand. She's in a corner, but she's in a room with giant southern facing windows, and then the window in the door to the other side of her is a west facing window. So even though like I feel like she was getting brighter light, not direct light, but directly on her brighter light when she was in here, I think the level, like the intensity of the indirect light that she's getting in the bedroom now is just better because she has just absolutely taken off. I mean, all this growth in the front here, this is all like new plantlet growth that has happened over the course of the last year. She's really filled in, and as you can tell, nothing is like stretched out looking or anything here in the front. So basically I just keep this side facing the wall since it doesn't look the greatest, so that this beautiful bushy side right here can be seen. Now I do have a care guide for her as well. Like I said, I'll link all the care guides down below for you if you need to check them out. I will say these plants are pretty easy going. I mean, first of all, they propagate themselves. They are a kind of clumping style plant, so they just shoot up new plantlets on their own. You don't have to do anything special. They are clearly an upright growth pattern plant, which I feel like a lot of people who get into plants or at least I did. I got into a lot of trailing plants first, and then I started running out of places to put trailing plants. So sometimes it's nice to have an upright plant. Now, Aglaonema can get relatively large over time, you guys, but I've had her for, I think, right around 3 years, and I mean, she's not massive. I think she was in a 4-inch pot. She might have even been in a 6-inch pot when I got her. I've repotted her once into this slightly larger pot here that is about an 8-inch pot, but you can also probably see she's not super root bound. You can see roots, they're healthy, but she's not a fast rooter. And because she's not a fast rooter, that means she's also not going to have to be repotted that frequently. Nice thing about this plant too is you can always divide the plant if you don't have a lot of space and you need to keep it at the same size. You can easily just section off the plantlets when you're repotting it, give those away to people, sell them, whatever you want to do. And then that way you can keep the mama plant in the same size pot if you don't have room to go up to like a larger size pot. Also, very tolerant of me underwatering, very tolerant of me occasionally overwatering, just very resilient plant in general, and does do well in a range of lighting as long as you just don't get it into too low of light, which is funny because they are frequently marketed as low light plants. But I'm telling you right now, they'll survive in the low light, but they're going to get leggy and they aren't going to look nice, bushy, and full like she does right here. So I feel like Aglaonema in general are just highly underrated. Quick reminder, PSA, they do all have plastic cages around the roots now when you buy them. I highly recommend removing the plastic cages as soon as you bring the plant home. Like, hose all the dirt off. You're probably gonna have to use some scissors to carefully cut the plastic cages off, repot it up into appropriate soil, and you should be good to go. All right, put Maria back aside, dumping dirt everywhere here. And I think we'll look at the other plant that I have on the floor next. Okay, so next up, I brought out one of my mini syngoniums that I own because I seriously feel like syngoniums are highly underrated. They are, oh my God, they're some of the best plants. If you want a truly like low light tolerant, and I say tolerant because most plants, you guys, they don't like it. They want ideal lighting, but certain ones will perform well in low light. Like, will they do a little bit better in brighter light? Yes. But syngonium are actually one of those plants that I find don't do as well the brighter light I get them into. They actually seem to prefer medium low to low light. I have this Glow syngonium right here. Absolutely love this plant. This is living in a north-facing window in my dining room. And my syngonium white butterfly is living in front of the obstructed by the Chinese magnolia window that I was talking about here in my office. Now, arguably, my white butterfly is not quite as bushy looking as this plant, but this is also what is known as a mini variety of syngonium. So this naturally stays smaller, the leaves stay smaller, it stays more compact versus the white butterfly that gets the bigger leaves, really wants to climb. But this is one of the things I love about syngonium and why I feel like they are underrated is you can cut them back like as much as you want and they will just get bushy new growth going on, and you can keep them growing as easily as like an upright plant. This isn't trailing at all. This plant has rarely ever trailed for me. I've never propagated it. You can see that the vines, they're growing out. Like eventually that would start to trail. I have had some of the oldest leaves die off and have had to remove them, so that's why we don't see like leaves hanging down there from there. But like it is quite easy to keep them looking like a bushy upright growth pattern type plant, which is one of the things I love about them and one of the reasons I feel like they're underrated. Now, the last time we looked at this plant, and this is another thing I love about syngoniums, actually, I don't even know. This one is so different, you guys. So with my other syngoniums, well, primarily with my white butterfly syngonium, I've had to trim that one. I propagated it a lot. If anybody wants to buy a syngonium white butterfly propagation off of me, just let me know in the comments down below, and I will send you an email and get your information and give you a price to ship one to you, because I've got quite a few. So I've had to trim that one a lot, and every time I trim it, it pops off more and more vines out of the center of it. That's why it's easy to keep them looking bushy and full. This one, like I said, I've never had to cut this one. My snips have never touched a vine on this plant. They have removed leaves that were dying off of a vine, but I've never trimmed it down. And despite that, I forget how long ago it's been now, probably at least 6 months, if not longer. Despite that, I started getting all of this new growth coming in the center of these vines. And as that happens, some of these older leaves that you can see look a little bit lighter in color. They're kind of yellowish. Some of the older leaves started dying off as all this new growth in the middle came in, and it was all tucked down in there until recently. And now hopefully you guys can see those big darker green leaves are starting to become taller than the older leaves that are a bit lighter in color. So it has it's like doubled its bushiness since that started happening, you guys. And I didn't have to do anything special to make that happen. And like I said, it lives directly in a north facing window, and it has lived directly in that north facing window the entire time I have had it. This one I have had, I think, probably about 2.5 years, I believe. I can't say enough about it. Like, it is fabulous. And if you really like this more like compact, bushy, smaller leaf looking syngonium, any of the varieties that are labeled mini, and most of them are called mini illusion. This is one of the few that's not actually called an illusion. It's just a syngonium glogo. But any of the ones labeled mini illusion have a similar growth pattern to this and tend to stay a bit more bushy. Now, care for these. Once again, I have a video. I will link it down below for you. But care for these. They're pretty forgiving, you guys. They honestly, you can let them dry all the way out. I do find if I let them dry all the way out, I tend to lose some of the older leaves, and they don't even look like they're getting droopy or anything like that. They just start to turn yellow, and I'm like, maybe it's time to water that plant. So I kind of don't like to let them dry completely out, but they also seem to be extremely tolerant of me overwatering them. But I have a hunch that a lot of this has to do with the fact that they send their roots straight down to the bottom of the pot no matter what. They're notorious for doing it. You can repot these, and like a week later, you'll have roots coming out of the drainage holes. I'm sure I have roots. Yep. There's roots coming out all in here, and it hasn't even been a year since I repotted this into this pot. That's just what they do. But because they do that, I feel like if you overwater, there's not like, all the roots tend to be like at the bottom. I don't know how to explain this. They coil around so tightly at the bottom that they end up actually pushing the dirt part of the plant up out of the bottom, and they create air around the roots, which is what roots want. And that's how we prevent root rise, by making sure that roots are getting enough oxygen, right? So if there's not a lot of roots up top and the soil's staying too wet because you overwatered, well, all those roots are at the bottom, and if they push their way up like that, they're fine. I think that's part of it's almost like a built-in mechanism to combat us potentially overwatering them, which once again is why I feel like they are severely underrated. I cannot say enough about syngoniums. Absolutely love them. Okay, let me put this plant back down. I think we might talk about some philodendron next. Okay, so I personally think that, and I don't think this was always the case, and these are just my opinions. I probably should have said that up front, you guys. Like, these are just my opinions. Maybe not everybody thinks these plants are underrated by people, but the next one I want to show you is definitely probably this particular variety is not highly underrated. I do, however, feel like it is getting overshadowed by the rarer varieties of this plant, which kind of annoy me because I personally don't think the rarer varieties of this plant are anywhere near as beautiful as this variety. But I do feel like as the popularity of large leaf climbing philodendrons has grown, I feel like the popularity of the small trailing heart-shaped leaf philodendrons has waned, and I feel like they have become highly underrated because they are just some of the best plants ever. I want to actually start with the philodendron Brazil, which is too big to bring out here, but this plant grows like a weed. It grows like a weed. It has spent most of its life living directly in a north-facing window in my dining room, and it's done absolutely fine. And even though it is a variegated plant, and lots of times if you don't get your variegated plants into enough light, the variegation can start to disappear on you. That has not happened for me with the philodendron Brazil. It has maintained its variegation in that window. You saw what it looked like. It is a big old trailing bush, which I absolutely love. And it is considered one of the more like super common, like people are like, oh, it's a philodendron Brazil, whatever. No, not whatever. Like they are fabulous. And I've had it's such an easy time with that plant. That plant probably needs to be repotted. I've only ever repotted it once, probably a little over 3 years ago now, but it's done fine. I leave it up there until it gets dry. This time of year, I'm having to water a little bit more frequently, but in the winter, I can go like probably around 15 days before I have to get that plant down and water it. I don't have any problems with it losing leaves a lot of the time or anything like that. The more I trim it, the more it bushes out. It's a fabulous plant. I can't say enough about it. And the next one I want to show you is my all-time favorite, which if you've been around for a while, you probably know what plant I'm about to show you here. All-time favorite trailing small heart-shaped leaf philodendron, and that is, of course, the beautiful philodendron micans. Getting stuck on my computer cord there. Love this plant, you guys, with these velvety green leaves that I feel like are hard to see right now because this light from the window is kind of shining through the back sides of them, but hopefully you can see. And the reason that they have kind of a copperish color when that light is shining through is because the back sides of these leaves are a beautiful red color. Absolutely love plants with reddish colored back leaves. Now, this plant, I did repot it not that long ago. I did have some leaf loss. I did get, and this is not uncommon on philodendron micans if you guys weren't aware, I did start getting some of the leaves that were turning like completely, hold on, let me try to get this flat on my hand so you can get a better idea of the color. Turning completely kind of reddish. It's really not helping, is it? Completely reddish in color. You can tell the difference there. And some of them have gotten kind of an orangish cast at the top of them, but then there's other ones that look absolutely stunning like this. And not to say that the reddish ones don't look stunning. There's several different things that can cause that, you guys. Sometimes sun stressing can cause that. Let me try that again. Watering inconsistencies can also cause that. So if you water too soon or you wait too long to water, sometimes certain fertilizers can cause that. If it's got a nutrient imbalance, it can cause that. There's really nothing to worry about, like if the plant's not killing off all those leaves or anything like that, which mine is not at all. I really feel like the backlit version of this plant is not doing it justice. I might flash in some footage of it living on the wall where it normally lives in my living room, which is next to my southern facing windows, but it's pretty far back from the windows, you guys. I want to say it's like maybe about 8 or 9 feet back from that window, and it loves life there. This plant also regularly will pop out new vines off the top without me doing anything. So there's a brand new vine there. So I know it looks a little bit sparse since I took it up from a 4-inch, actually I think it was in a 3.5-inch pot, up into this 6-inch pot, but it will start to fill itself in over time. And once again, pretty laid back plant. I just wait till it is dry completely out to water it. If I go a little bit past that point, it doesn't throw a huge fit. It will bounce back pretty quickly if I do go a little bit too long between watering it. And I will say, I know I've overwatered this plant before, and hasn't like totally died on me, hasn't thrown a major fit. I do lose more leaves on this one, I feel like, over the course of a year than on my philodendron Brazil. Like, I feel like on my philodendron Brazil, you guys, I mean, I cannot say enough about that philodendron Brazil. 5 leaves in a year maybe die, oldest leaves die and fall off. I definitely lose more than that on this plant, but this is also a very prolific grower. I have to cut and propagate it at least like 4 times a year because otherwise it's going to hit my couch and the cats are going to want to play with it, and I don't want that to happen. But just so you guys can see, because I haven't shown you since I repotted it, see those nice white healthy roots are already spreading around in there. So I know it might have sounded like, oh, you took it from a 3.5-inch pot up into a 6-inch pot. That might be a bit much, but no, it's done fine. It is recovering just fine, and that is one of the things that I absolutely love about it. A plant that I can repot that doesn't throw a massive fit is always a win in my book. I love this, and I'm sorry, this is so much prettier in my opinion, once again, just my opinion, than the variegated version of the Micans, than the halo version of the Micans. They're definitely better looking than the pink mint version of the Micans. Just with all these rare Micans being so popular right now, like, that's why I feel like the traditional Micans is becoming a little bit underrated and overlooked, and it does not deserve to be underrated or overlooked. It is one of my all-time favorite plants, so highly, highly recommend it. And they are more readily available in stores now than they were when I first got into houseplants, because I had to get this from Steve's Leaves. You couldn't find these in stores anywhere when I first got into houseplants, but let me set her back aside. All right, you guys, so next up, no, in my personal opinion, once again, no underrated houseplant video would be complete without some type of epipremnum aureum on the list, because they're just so fabulous. There is not, actually, the plant we're going to look at after this, it's the same way in my opinion. Plants that can tolerate and bounce back from just about anything are like #1 in my book. And if you can continue to look good while going through that, that's an even bigger plus. And so I brought out here my epipremnum aureum pearls in jade, because she's the smallest one. Well, she's the smallest one I have that's actually trailing right now, and I wanted you guys to be able to see what they look like when they're nice and bushy and full and trailing. And honestly, my Marble Queen, epipremnum aureum Marble Queen, also referred to as Marble Queen pothos, is hands down my favorite epipremnum aureum I own, but she is too big to hold up on screen for you. And honestly, this one is starting to get to that point too. Now, this plant also is desperately in need of a repot. It's been probably also about 3 years since this one was repotted. I am starting to get some leaf loss going on. You can see there's some yellowing going on in some of the leaves. It is starting to lose leaves more frequently, which is a good sign, because I know I'm not overwatering or underwatering this plant. That is a good sign that this plant needs to be repotted. So we're going to be doing that soon. But despite losing more and more leaves, you can see still looks totally massively bushy. My epipremnum aureum Marble Queen, also when I repotted it with you guys, I don't even remember, a few months back, I guess, and I root pruned it because I didn't have a bigger pot to take it into, threw a little bit of a fit, lost more leaves than normal, but still looks massively bushy, which is one of the things I absolutely love about these plants. And one of the reasons I feel like they're underrated, because some other plants, Scindapsus come to mind. Once again, my personal experience with Scindapsus are, if they lose a bunch of leaves, they start to look pretty sparse on their vines, and they don't seem to pop off as much new growth at the top to make up for that as these plants will. These plants just grow so prolifically. This one is on my nightstand in my bedroom, so it is a few feet, 5-6 feet maybe back from my southern facing windows. And it took me a while to find a place that this one was happy. It just wasn't growing where other windows I had it in. I had it in north facing windows in here at one point. I tried it in my kitchen at one point. But when I moved it into my bedroom and put it over there on that nightstand, it took off, and it just grows so crazy right now. I have to propagate it like every few months. And every time I cut it, it just bushes out, like from existing vines, it'll pop out new vines off of there. That's why, even though when it starts to lose more and more leaves, it still looks nice and big and beautiful and full like this. And if I underwater it, it might get upset. It might drop some leaves. It might have leaves go limp, get droopy. As soon as I water it, it bounces right back. If I overwater it, you might have some leaves start to turn yellow right away and start dying off. That's usually a pretty good sign that you have overwatered the plant if it happens like immediately. I just make sure to wait a little bit longer the next time between watering, make sure it has for sure dried all the way out, and it recovers. It does fine. I have never had a problem with root rot on any of my epipremnum aureums. This one actually isn't even in my and actually neither is my marble queen, because I think I told you when we repotted that plant, it was in my basic mix because it was one of the earliest plants I ever got, and I hadn't moved it to epiphyte mix, which is what I would put it in if it was a new plant, a new epipremnum aureum that I got nowadays. I would put it into my epiphyte mix. But because the soil was so like intertwined with the roots when we repotted it, I ended up just putting it back into my basic mix again. And this one I can see is also in my basic mix. So they are super resilient, because I'm here to tell you right now, a lot of my other epiphytic plants like this, a lot of my philodendrons would not be as tolerant of me potentially overwatering on occasion in my basic mix. They'd be a little bit more tolerant in my epiphyte mix, but that's just because the epiphyte mix is a little bit chunkier. It tends to not get as wet in the first place when it's watering, when I water it, and it doesn't retain moisture as much as my basic mix does. And if you're not familiar with my mixes, I'll link that video down below in the description for you too. There's gonna be a lot of linked videos in this video, I'm just now realizing, but hey, if it helps you guys out, I'm here for it. All right, whoa, just look at her. I'm just remembering how small she was when I first got her. Like, I thought she was never gonna grow and get this big and bushy. Now look at her. Absolutely love her. Cannot recommend these plants enough. Ugh. Very, very underrated. Okay, put her back aside, and then I think we have 2 more plants we're going to look at. Side note, I'm really liking how she looks on my bookshelf right here while I'm filming in my office. However, she will not get enough light there, you guys. But if I continue to film in here, I might just bring her to hang out with us each time I do. All right, guys, so these last 2 plants we're gonna be looking at are the ones that I'm probably gonna get the most people disagreeing with me on, but just hear me out. I feel like these are both just highly underrated plants, and I'm gonna explain why. But the first one I want to talk about are Tenanthe in general, but I specifically want to talk about the Tenanthe luberciana, because that is the variety of Tenanthe that you are most likely to come across in your local nurseries, Home Depot, Lowe's. I got mine from Lowe's, I believe. They're super common, they're easy to find, and you guys, I know it's a prayer plant, family plant, and when people hear Calathea, Tenanthe, Maranta, a lot of people are like, no, bad experience, crispy, dying plant. But Tenanthes, out of all of the prayer plant family plants, you guys, I've said it before, I will keep saying it to you, are the hardiest, easiest ones to care for. They are the least likely to give you crispy leaves. And when you just look at my Tenanthe luberciana, I feel like I show this plant a lot, and there's a reason. It is a massive, massive bush at this point, and it definitely needs to be repotted. It is killing off a ton of older leaves. It is drying out way too quickly. I don't know what I'm gonna do with it though, you guys. Like, I probably need to trim it back and propagate it a bunch, but I kind of don't want to. And I don't even know if I have a bigger pot, but it's still putting out a ton of new growth though, even though it's losing a ton of leaves because it needs to be repotted. And it is so far away from my southern facing windows. It's on the opposite side of the room. I want to say that's like, I can't remember what the dimensions of my master bedroom are, honestly, off the top of my head, you guys, but I think it's at least 18 feet away from those giant southern facing windows, and then at least about 8 feet away from an east facing window. That should be like considered low light, but look at it. It is so massive, you guys. And I went ahead and brought out the only other, well, this isn't the only other Tenanthe I own, but this is my second favorite Tenanthe that I own, which is my Burl Marxii. Burl Marxii. I always question that, you guys. We've looked at this one recently too, but it has just been popping off even more growth lately. It is starting to get a lot more tall, just like the luberciana one. It's taken longer to get to that point, which is another reason that I feel like the luberciana is so underrated, is because it is such a prolific grower. I do not get crispy leaves on that plant, you guys. I typically don't get crispy leaves on this plant either. As you can see, there aren't any right now, but every now and again, as the older leaves, the smaller leaves that are underneath here that were originally on the plant when I got it, when they get ready to die off, they'll start getting a little crispy on the tips before they actually die off. But beyond that, I mean, look at this, you guys. And none of these plants that we're looking at today, I probably should have brought this up too. These plants, another reason I feel like they're underrated is they do fine in the ambient humidity in my home. And the ambient humidity in my home in the wintertime is usually in the low to mid 30s, unless it's raining, then maybe we get up maybe in the 40s, maybe low 50s. But in the summertime, like I rarely get above like 50% humidity in here. I'd say we probably average somewhere in the mid 40s in the summertime. And these plants do fine for me. I don't have like massive problems with anything with them. Honestly, you guys, my biggest problem with this one was that it took forever to start growing because apparently it didn't like living slightly far back from one of my southern facing windows in my living room. Moved it upstairs where it's closer to an east facing window, and it's next to a southern facing window, but it has a solar screen on it, which is almost like turning a southern facing window into a north facing window, and it took off. Like it is just doing fabulous. They really are, you guys, if you, I keep saying this, keep preaching it, I don't have room to put it there. If you like the look of prayer plant family plants, but you've struggled with them or you're intimidated by them, get a Tenanthe to start with and get a Luberciana, honestly, because it will boost your confidence, and then go get yourself a Burl Marxii like this, and then you'll have another boost of confidence, and then maybe you will feel ready to tackle a Calathea, which brings us to our last plant. Let me grab her. All right, you guys, before I show this final plant to you, I want to remind you that this video is titled Underrated Houseplants, not houseplants that are underrated because they're what a lot of people think are super easy. Now, a lot of these plants I have been showing you, I have said I feel like they are super easy. I'm also realizing I didn't really talk about watering and everything with the Tenanthes. So I will say, if you're a drastic underwaterer, you're probably going to have issues with the Tenanthe, but less so than you will with, for example, the plant that I am about to show you, because once again, out of all the prayer plant family plants, I find that Tenanthe are able to, you can let them get more dry without mass issue than you can, for example, a Maranta, a Calathea, a Stromanthe. So just keep that in mind, but they do like to be kept more on the moist side, not gonna lie, as does this gal. I already know people are going to come for me in the comments on this one, but if you've been here for a while, it should be no shock that I'm bringing out my Calathea White Fusion, or White Fusion Calathea, whichever order you like to say the name in. Hopefully you guys can still hear me, even though I am blocked by all of this beautiful, massive, gorgeous white and green variegated foliage with these gorgeous purplish backside of these leaves. What is not to love about how this plant looks? I don't care if you're a Calathea hater, you guys, you have to be able to admit that this is beautiful. At least tell me you think this is beautiful. I feel like if you don't think this is beautiful, I don't know, something's wrong. Something's wrong. No, it's okay. We all have differing opinions and different views on what we think is beautiful, so I don't want to make anybody feel bad, but I'm just saying, this is a gorgeous plant, in my opinion. Now, a lot of people like to hate on this plant. I actually think this is the most hated on Calathea, and it is not fair, you guys, and that's why I had to include it on this underrated houseplant list. Because if you're relatively new here, let me tell you about what this plant has gone through. I kid you not, you guys. Have a different softbox out today for lighting over here, and just like in our last video, the bulb just burned out. But since this is our last plant to look at, we just aren't going to worry about it today. But what this plant has been through, as you may be aware, and first of all, I want to address this. So this plant desperately needs to be repotted. We're starting to see like some roots coming down through the drainage holes there. But you guys, can you see the misformation on the pot here? Like how it looks kind of lumpy? It's because their tubers have gotten massive in here. And it is just so jam-packed. Look how close, oh my gosh, I'm gonna get her foliage up there for you to see. Look how close she is to the edge. She has filled this pot in so much that she needs to be repotted. I'm having to water her more frequently. Does not like to dry out. You do have to keep her more on the moist side. Like you'll probably think, oh my God, the soil's still wet, but you're gonna need to water her anyway. But because we are needing to be repotted, we are starting to kill off like our oldest leaves down here. That's fine though, because do you see how tall these new leaves are that are coming in at the top here? And she's pumping out so much new growth right now. Like I can't even count how many leaves are coming out. I also, this is hilarious, you guys. I don't know if you guys can even see it. There's actually a box, one of the little boxes that you can put beneficial bugs in, such as the beneficial mites that I use to combat like spider mites when there's a super bad infestation, because I find that it is easier, you can get rid of them more quickly in my personal experience using beneficial mites if it is a bad outbreak versus trying to just tackle it with pest spray. And so she has gone through several bad infestations of spider mites, specifically twice. And each of those times, you guys, I had to cut her back to virtually nothing. I'm talking just a few leaves left. But as you can see, she always comes back, and she comes back like with a vengeance and quick. She grows back in quick, you guys. This is the biggest you guys have ever seen her. It's the biggest I've ever seen her. And thankfully that's because we've gone well over a year now, knock on wood, without a spider mite problem. But what I was getting at was the release boxes that you use for those. She has one that I forgot was on her because I put it on there just as a preventative measure when I had to get the beneficial mites to treat the flat mite outbreak I had on my cyclamen. I was like, I might as well, if I'm gonna have to order bugs, let's just get enough. Let's give all the spider mite magnet ones some bugs just in case. Got the food to keep the bugs alive. Put it on her, and she's grown so much in the few months since I did that, I couldn't even see the box. Like, you guys can't see the box. It's in there. She is completely covered and hidden the box. I'm gonna have to like carefully separate her leaves out and get it out of there after this video. But she is doing fabulous, you guys. And that is why I feel like she is so underrated. She is tough as nails. How many plants do you guys know that you can cut back to nothing? Not because you wanted to, but because you had to, because they were so damaged and so infested with a pest. That was the only course of action. How many plants do you know that can go through A, the trauma inflicted by the pest infestation, B, the trauma of you cutting them that far back, C, not have to do anything else to the plant, aka she's in a relatively deep pot. I did not repot her either time she had the pest outbreak. I didn't downpot her, which lots of times is what you have to do if you cut plants back that much because it's just not enough foliage to use up the water quick enough. But luckily, she is a plant that likes to be kept more on the moist side, so I just leave her in the pot. Did nothing special, did not move her to a brighter location, nothing. I left her exactly where she has been living, in my bathroom, about probably 4 feet back from an east-facing frosted glass window, and I just let her be. Didn't have to water her as frequently because obviously she wasn't using up the water as quickly. We would go almost a month sometimes when we got down to that few leaves before I would water her again, but she bounces back and bounces back big time. I mean, a plant that can do this, you guys, and look this good, and it wasn't until about maybe 2 weeks ago that she started killing off these older leaves at the bottom because she needs to be repotted. But once again, I don't even care. I could go cut those off if I want to right now. No big deal. Look at all the new growth and all the slightly older growth up here. Not a crispy leaf amongst them. Not a yellowish leaf amongst them. It's just the ones that are dying off due to needing to be repotted. And once again, 2 to 3 weeks ago, those weren't yellow or crispy. I mean, she was pristine. And I just can't tell you guys, like, I can't handle it. It's a pet peeve of mine in general is people trash talking Calathea. I know they're not for everybody, but I feel like they get a bad rap. I really can't handle it when people trash talk this plant. Beyond that they're spider mite magnets, yes, that's a fact. That's just a fact. Odds are they have spider mites when you get them, but you can get rid of them, as I have proven, and you can have a beautiful full bushy, like mixing up the first letters of words today, you guys, but a big, beautiful, full and bushy plant like this, and in ambient humidity. Once again, ambient humidity. Now she is living in my bathroom. I shower once a day, so the bathroom gets a little humid, but that's just once a day. That's not gonna like last, but I've gone out of town for a week and come back and she still looks pristine. So I am saying right now, this plant is so underrated. It gets such a bad rap. It is really a shame. I mean, in general, you guys, rhizome-based plants, which is what this is, what prayer plant family plants are, rhizome-based plants can come back from almost anything. All of them. Your Marantas, if you have to cut them back to the soil line, they'll come back. If your Stromanthe, you have to cut it back to the soil line, they'll come back. Your Tenanthes, same thing. they are highly resilient plants. I think where the problem happens is people think because they've died back, whether you cut them back or not, if they've died back to the soil, people think they're dead. But if you slip that plant out of its pot and it definitely does not have root rot, I guarantee you it will come back. Just make sure you're not overwatering it. Let the soil, it's going to take longer for the soil to dry out if there's no foliage. Just let it dry out more. Leave it where it is. Let it be. And I can guarantee you it will start to pop off new growth as long as those roots remain healthy. But this is the only prayer plant family plant that I have seen do it this quickly and get this big and this full after having that happen. Both times, you guys. Both times I had to cut this plant back. So I might just go ahead and call this the most underrated houseplant on the list today. But I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. If so, please be sure to click that like and or subscribe button down below. And while you're down there, drop a comment and let me know what houseplants you own that you feel are highly underrated and why. Thanks for joining me today, you guys, and I look forward to seeing you again next time. Aloha!